Hello, welcome to an extended conversation with, and you'll have to get this straight because it's on again at 8 o'clock. And we have multiple producers here. We have the fastest fingers in the world operating in this studio with Paul, who's on at 8 o'clock. And he has his own conversation program with the experience of all the networks, De Lorenzo. And my name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the executive director of Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And here in the studio, I'm going to pass the mic around and have everybody introduce themselves to you.
I am the world's foremost authority, Professor Erwin Corey. Many people wonder on what. It's none of their business.
And I'm Miss Joan Marie Musi, and I'm the co-host of Let 'Em Talk with Paul DiRienzo at 8 o'clock, and I hope you'll come back and see us there with all our guests again.
I'm Dr. Genie Tartell, co-author of the newest fitness book called Get Fit in Bed.
And I'm Ted Kavana, a co-author with Genie Tartell of Get Fit in Bed.
And I'm Paul, and I'll stick my head in here. If I can figure out which way is left and right on television. I'm Paul DiRienzo, and the host with Joni, who you can see right behind us, of Let Them Talk, which is the program that follows at 8 o'clock. And we're going to continue on with some of the same conversations we're having here tonight when that show starts at 8. So stay tuned and keep your TVs tuned to Channel 56. So we're going to move on with the program, and I'm going to pass it back to Shannon, who is the regular host of this slot.
Thank you, Paul. I was at Stuyvesant High School this morning for Black History Month, and we had a sterling panel with Judge Jackson from the Supreme Court, and Judge Dowling from the Supreme Court, and Judge Alvin Yearwood from the Criminal Court, talking about into the 21st century and the continuing fight on racism. And then we had from the Friars Club, Cynthia Brown, talking about the evolution of African-American music, and approximately 150 or more students from all over the world. And I mentioned to the faculty and the administration, Mr. De Lorenzo coming from radio, and they knew his name quite well. So, and they were trying to forget mine and remember his, which should have been no surprise to mine, but the credit did me good. So thank you, Paul.
I'm glad it did.
Black History Month.
Black History Month.
It's the shortest month in the
No, I did not notice that, but you would.
It's not that I noticed, but Black History. It's not Black History. It's the history of the blacks. Because when you say Black History, you're using black as an adjective, and black in lowercase lettering is an adjective. Anytime you use the word black, that's not an adjective, should be in capital letters. It's demeaning to put it in lowercase lettering. Would you put the word Jew in lowercase letterings when you're talking about some Shylock? No.
We also have authors here in the studio talking about health and fitness. Obviously, they didn't intend to talk about me. They intended to talk about the 92-year-old young Professor Corey, who you just heard from. And I had the great honor and privilege of meeting them on our friend the Joey Reynolds show from WOR. You see, I get around. You may not think, but I get around. And it's not because of health and fitness. I try my best, but it's not. And Mr. Kavanaugh, I was introduced to being one of the founding officers or vice presidents of CNN News in the day when it really was news. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kavanaugh, and we can take it from there.
Well, we wrote a book, Genie Tartell and I, called Get Fit in Bed. I was at CNN. I had saved a lot of money during my lifetime, and then I went broke, and because I was gambling in the stock market. And I went broke, and I was lying in bed and looking at the ceiling, and the cracks began to speak to me and said, do something. So I started exercising on a cot that I was living on. And after about a year, I had a series of exercises that I thought were, very relaxing, and they calmed the mind, which was interesting for me. Anybody can do these exercises. So I brought them to Dr. Genie Tartell, who's a Manhattan chiropractor, and she looked at them, and she can tell you what she thought and what happened after that.
Took a look at the exercises that Ted had presented to me, and noticed that the patterning of the exercises made a lovely routine that was easy to follow and very, very understandable. And when I started to test these exercises with my patients to see how they would respond, it was wonderful to see that all stages of life and all stages of recovery, the patients were responding well to the exercises. But as Ted had said to me about the exercises, is that the exercises actually helped him to fall asleep at night. And my patients started to report the same things. And when I started to do the exercises myself, I found that I had this beautiful deep sleep. So not only were the exercises phenomenal in increasing your strength, increasing your endurance, increasing your flexibility, but they also promoted sleep, which in today's high-stress days and the use of all of the medications that they're using to help us, that they're promoting to help us sleep, this is a wonderful, natural way of reducing anxiety and in achieving a deep, wonderful sleep.
Now, Jeannie, what kind of a mattress do you recommend exercising on? Like, is a futon better, or a pillow top, or
Anything that you're comfortable enough to be sleeping in is a mattress that you can use to do your
what about like a
exercises in.
Tempur-Pedic where it sinks? No?
Doesn't really matter. Your body adjusts to it, and it's just a matter of what your body is comfortable with. Yeah, there are
Interesting.
no. I mean, I haven't. I'm sure if I had asked my patients what mattresses they were using, each of them would have come up with a different brand, and some of them were actors, so they were sleeping on sofa beds. Ted had actually done the exercises on a cot, and they were all getting the same results. They were getting an increase in just physical feeling of well-being, but the sleep was an important part, the increase in sleep. So, I mean, at that point I said to Ted, let's go for it. Let's do
Right.
this book.
Isn't it true that some people sleep faster than others?
I would say just some people do fall asleep faster than others. Some people have that wonderful capability of being able to get right into bed and falling asleep. But other people just have thoughts going round and round in their head.
The experience I had was that even in the middle of the night, I would get up in the middle of the night and worried, and you have repetitive thoughts. Many people have this. You get up in the same thought, you say, well, I'm going to forget this thought and go to sleep. You can't sleep. You keep the same thing over and over. So I started doing the exercises at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and what happened after them is the thoughts normalized. And those things went away, and I found myself soon enough going back into a deep sleep. It was remarkable. Now, I'm not saying this is good for people that have real insomnia, serious problems. But if someone has just the usual problems we have in stresses, it's very relaxing. Now, interestingly, the medical community for decades was saying, do not exercise before you go to sleep. Don't do it. It keeps you awake. That was the advice. Well, I said this to Genie, and it's funny because we were starting to work on a book, and then the New York Times in January of last year did an article that the new research said exercise, even not moderate but heavier exercise, indeed helps most people go to sleep. So the whole thing they were teaching for years and saying for years turned out not to be
They did a
true.
flip-flop on that. Now, Professor Irwin Corey, do you have an exercise program?
Well, I'll tell you something. We got to relate often, or else if we don't relegate our energy to develop at least a curiosity, it leaves us not only in a state of morbidity, but clouded with disunity in such unification forms that leave. What was the question?
I went broke many times just thinking about investing in the stock market. I never actually got to the point. And I got so broke just thinking about the stock market that I got to sleep right away every time I went to the bed wondering what I was going to be able to afford the next day.
Well, you know that song? The stock market's a funny place. It's the craziest place in town. The seats cost $500,000 cash, but the brokers won't sit down. There's the broker, the bull, and the bear. And the beer is not a joke. You get the bull till your bankroll's bare, and the broker says you're broke. And here is the song you hear the whole day long. Oh, the market's not so good today. Your stocks look kind of sick. In fact, they all drop down a point each time the tick is ticked. You'll have to have more margin now in order any doubt. So you better come with a load of cash or we'll have to sell you out. I bought some elevator stock and thought I'd done well when the little bears all ran downstairs and rang the basement bell.
All right.
They still can carry a tune. Paul?
I made my money not only on the entertainment field. I made my money in the stock market. 2 years ago, I bought 1,000 shares of Prudential Real Estate for $1 a share. This year, 2 years later, the stock is selling for $200 a share.
Wow.
But I sold out at $1.50. I made a 50% profit right away.
Paul, what would you ask Erwin Corey?
Wow, there's so many questions. Professor Corey, you are an icon in the New York City area, and few people, I don't know if as many people know the good works that you've done over the years, as well as your work as a comedian, as a raconteur, as a professor of everything. Tell us a little bit about what, and I know you're an activist to this day, and tell me a little bit about your activism, what you're involved in and what you're working on, what projects that you're supporting right now.
What project I'm working on now?
Yes.
Well, I think if rather than to expose myself before the object is completed, I think we should sustain our energy to look for things that areas need more concern. I don't think that we should be talking about inconsequential and things that don't make any sense or do make sense but don't matter is in relation to what is going on in the world today. They give 15 minutes of talk about that woman who died mysteriously and left $474 million to an infant whose parents are not yet necessarily been proven to be the ones that are going to be related to what the money is about. So we must understand that it's the priorities that we must enunciate, that we must try to clarify issues which disturb the world. For instance, Bush, who has violated the Constitution, by the way. The Constitution was never, ever ratified. It was the 10 amendments that were ratified. The 10 amendments should not be amendments, but they should be considered in the structure of the Constitution itself.
Well,
Because
Professor
otherwise the Constitution has no...
Follow up briefly, because Professor
You
Corey-
think he's going to pause at this moment? You asked him a question. Activism of 50 years, and he's going to pause at the causes. He's obviously lining up for paternity of that $475 million there.
Right, well, that was my question, because on several occasions I've heard you say, as you gave money to one good cause or another, that you were giving your
Children's
children's
inheritance.
money. And does that fit into the?
That's
activist
true,
role?
that's true. I'm spending my son's inheritance while I'm alive. And I think that that's what it is. I don't believe in inheritance, although unfortunately in my position I was able to leave whatever little I have to the greatest family that my son has devised. And I feel that if he was a wealthy man whose will was being read to the relatives, and they all sat around and listened to the will, and the will went, "This is my last will and testament. While I was alive, I spent all my money."
I would like to spend it all too, Erwin. Just let me
Professor-
have a chance.
Professor Corey, I know you ran for president in 1960. Would you consider another run?
What?
I know that you ran for president in 1960. Would you
It was
consider another one?
1959.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, and I got 4,000 votes in Chicago alone. And I had slogans, Corey will run for any party and bring his own bottle. Says vote for Corey. Relief is just a vote away. Vote for Corey and go on welfare.
Now I understand we also have a.
And I had another slogan, let's soak the poor. Well, why? Ezekiel said there's a wheel within a wheel, and we know that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But the rich can't get richer unless the poor get poorer. So we'll take it from the poor before the rich get it.
All I know is I never saw a dime yesterday, today, or today.
Well, Ted Kavanaugh, we have. I wanted to ask you a question because I heard about your role in one of the founders of the CNN, and which I guess means cable news network. Although nothing goes over cable anymore, it's all going over satellite. But tell us a little bit about your relationship with Ted Turner. I mean, how come he seems to be doing pretty well these days? Do you think he made the right decision in getting out of CNN?
No, I think he regrets it. When I heard that CNN was going to be started, Reese Schoenfeld invited me to go down there, and I turned it down because I said to myself, "Who's this guy down in Atlanta? You know, some sailor or something?" And no one took him seriously, including me. In fact, the news on they had news on the station they own, a UHF station called WTBS. The news consisted of Bill Tush, who was the kind of comic figure at CNN, and next to him he had a dog, a real dog, and the dog wore a Cronkite mask. And they made fun of the news for 5 minutes, and that was the news that Ted Turner did. So I didn't take it seriously, and then I had to have a job. I needed a job, so I went down there, and I thought the thing couldn't work. No one thought it could work, and I didn't think it could work either. But
what's your history in journalism? Where did you cut your teeth in journalism?
Well, I started in television back around 1957, and then I worked at a bunch of stations, and I taught in a college. So I was one of the kind of pioneers. In fact, I worked when I was at Ithaca College, we did the very first television, live original television on cable in the history of the world. Because as you know, TV the cable was just what they call community antenna systems. And Ithaca was in a valley, like many places, couldn't get a signal. So they brought actually 2 CBS stations from New York State in there by cable. So the head of our department, Royal Coley, arranged with the owner of the system to allow us to come on the cable for an hour each night and do college programs. So that was, and I ran the studio, so that was the beginning of the first live origination. And interestingly...
And look how far it's come.
Look how far it's come. I'll just tell you one story. They had a show, one of the shows we had was a bunch of college professors discussing, you know, matters of the world, and we had the Royal Coley, the head of the department, he was the moderator. And then what happened is the college teachers, this is back in 1957, demanded to be paid to go on this little college station and went on strike. And the only professor who stayed with the show and said, "I don't care about the money," was a fellow named Dr. Martin Abend, who you'll recall maybe from Channel 5, 17 years at Channel 5. Right. The first, I think, conservative commentator in the history of American television.
Right.
Very much hated by a certain faction in New York and very much loved by others. But whenever he was on, the switchboard lit up. And that's the reason I brought him to New York, because I worked with him there at Ithaca College.
I see. Very interesting. And so that's are you pleased by the direction that the cable news business and CNN has gone in over the last?
Well, the answer to that question is no, as far as CNN is concerned. But I'll tell you what's happening in journalism, in effect. In America, for all the decades from the founding of America, even before it, journalism was run by factions. Political factions each had their little broadside, their journal and everything else. So it really was very political. And then later in the 20th century, the idea came about, hey, we're going to be objective. News will be straight, and the editorials be editorial, but that all in the control. So what's happened now with the proliferation of all these, you know, the internet and cable and everything else, is it's gone back now to what it was at the beginning of the country, where you have very partisan cable operations. CNN is a liberal tilt, Fox is conservative, MSNBC is liberal, the 3 networks are basically liberal, talk radio is basically conservative, so it's returned to what it was back in the old days.
So the idea of journalism and television journalism and media journalism as having rules of the game are over. Those days are over.
The professionalism that they tried to inculcate in the colleges and everything, that's gone. So the fact is that now you have people coming out of the college. It's become a professional thing. You want to be a journalist, you go to college, take a degree. In the old days, if you wanted to be a journalist, you started, carrying coffee and in the newsroom, carrying papers, and you worked your way up. In fact, when I ran Channel 5 News, I worked there for 7 or 8 years, and I was a news director later on. Marvin Scott, who's still on the air at Channel 11, he went out and he worked for me then at Channel 5. He went out and did a story in New Jersey, and he came back with a different story, a much better story. I said, Marvin, where'd you get that story? He said, a kid on a bicycle had a police radio when he gave me the story. I said, go back to New Jersey and bring me that kid. So he brought the kid in, and he was 14 years old, and I said, can you work after school, your mother drives? He said, yeah, I can work here. So he started working for me, but a month or two later, I sent him on the street. I said, don't go on camera, just let us see your hand. And he was breaking stories. That was John Miller.
Oh, really?
Who later became a big star of ABC and all the news operations, and is now #2 public relations man for the FBI. He loved police work.
Yes. He had a police radio when he was 14 years old, which is an interesting.
Got him started.
Right, but we've had folks on the air who know Miller and have been working on these type of stories, so that's interesting. And we both have had Peter Lance on, who.
Let me tell you my story about John Miller. By the way, do you know Eric Shawn?
Oh, yes, I do.
Eric Shawn, God bless him, is one of the few who believed me back when I was talking about the wave of fundamentalist terror that was going to strike us. And I'm talking way back when, 30 years. And John Miller was the one who interviewed me when Rabbi Meir Kavana was murdered outside the Marriott Hotel on 49th Street, whereas I was a freelance photographer.
No, he wasn't murdered. He was assassinated.
Assassinated.
There's a difference between
Yes,
being murdered and
yes,
assassinated.
Professor always corrects me. I
Got the
defer to
terminology right.
wit and wisdom here. And Miller was younger at the time. Later, he went on to 2020. And when he wrote his book about the whole episode of terrorism, he used that interview 10 years later as proof.
Well, by the way, Shannon, if they had followed up on the Meir Kahane assassination, they would have found all these people who later on became terrorists.
Well, that's
and
what
everything else.
Peter Lance says. He says that was the beginning of everything.
You know what the
but-
worst act of terrorism is? War. I'm going to give you an example. Terrorists in Ireland, they call them terrorists. In 29 years, 3,168 casualties. In 29 years, these terrorists, what they called, killed 3,168 people. In 29 years. But in one day, during World War II, 22,800 people were killed. 22,800 every day for 4.5 years. 50 million people. Whereas the Irish issue is they killed 1/3 of a person a day in 29 years. World War II, 22,800 were killed every single day. Which is more terrorizing? War? The difference between a terrorist and a soldier. A soldier has a license to kill. Doesn't know who he's killing. Doesn't know why he's killing. And gets paid. The terrorist knows who he's killing, knows why he kills them, but doesn't get paid. That's why there are so few terrorists. They just don't pay them.
Well, they get paid the next world with
That's the
73
theory,
virgins.
anyway.
The United States is
That's
giving
the theory.
$21,000 to every new recruit that signs up.
Of the U.S.
$21,000
Oh, I didn't-
cash before they go to get killed.
Well,
So they get paid before, right?
wasn't Saddam Hussein allegedly giving $10,000 to
25,000.
to every family of a martyr?
25,000.
25,000. I'm just being the devil's advocate.
And this room, the devil's advocate, of all places to play the devil's advocate, with a room filled with ammunition and a match.
And I'll tell you, in a revolution, for instance, the revolutionaries or the people in the army do not get paid in a revolution. There were no deserters in the revolution because a revolution is something that they start. The communists only lead a revolution after it starts. They don't start the revolution because communists do not believe
But
in
they
violence.
hope for it to start, right?
Right?
They hope for it to start.
Well, if President Corey, if
They advocate it.
under communism, they
But not violence. They never use violence. Violence is perpetrated by the people who are in control.
since I'm controlling this microphone, I'm going to say something about communism. Under what they call the Black Book of Communism, which was a record of the communist murders, I think it was 125 to 150 million people died under communist rule.
How many?
I think it was 125 or 150 million died under
Where?
that worldwide.
World War II.
Worldwide, under communist domination,
Yeah.
mass murder. I think
But
30 million died. I think in
Under
Russia.
capitalist domination, 50 million people were killed in World War II. 50 million people are not under communist rule, but under capitalist rule. So don't give me that shit about this other crap.
Bleep, bleep, bleep.
Let me just add that as far as communism, Stalin tried to prevent Spain from going the way of Nazi support of Franco, and it was Franco who turned over that city Guernica to Nazi bombs for Hitler's bombs that Picasso immortalized in that painting. And it was Russia that tried to warn everybody of what's coming, and unfortunately it was only the Hemingways and others on my mother-in-law's side, God bless her, who tried to prevent all the independents who went over to try to prevent
and
that.
what did Roosevelt do? He put a blockade. He wouldn't let any country support the legal constituted government in Spain. He put a blockade so that nobody can bring help to the Spaniards.
We have only 30 seconds left to go, folks, and let's.
Yeah,
we're
don't
gonna
forget to
continue on.
tune back in at 8 o'clock.
gonna continue-
because this conversation's going to continue.
We're going to continue at 8 o'clock, so stay tuned. But we have 30 seconds left, and do we have any last words? I want to give Genie Tartell an opportunity because we've been like being a typical bunch of guys and dominating conversation with politics and social
Oh my
issues.
God.
Tell us about your book just in 20 seconds. Get fit in
The
bed.
book is an easy-to-use exercise book that has very clear photos and very clear instructions on a very easy, user-friendly program that is good for people of all ages and
so that
all
folks
health.
can survive.
Let them talk if they want to. Talk don't bother me.
I'm Paul D'Arienzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Marie
He
Musi.
says, I'm a
And
pirate.
joining us, one of our guests
He
tonight
says, if
is
you're
here,
a pirate,
Professor Erwin
where are
Corey.
your buccaneers?
Professor
He
Corey,
says, under my
you're
bucket hat.
live on the air. We'll just let you be there. There you are.
We're back on the air.
Back on the air.
So welcome.
We're on
to
the air
Let's
again?
Talk, yes.
Isn't that marvelous? People don't know that we, who weigh almost 100 pounds apiece, are on the air. We're floating somewhere in mid-bush area. Bush, I'll tell you something. I'd rather be a son of a bitch than the son of a bush. You talk about four-letter words of Lenny Bruce. You know a four-letter word that offends me the most?
What is it?
B-U-S-H.
Oh,
That's a very offensive term.
For those of you who don't know Professor Erwin Corey, you soon will. And if you have any doubts after this show, you should visit a doctor. I'll give you a name, because Erwin is somebody that you can have no doubts about. Hi, I'm Shannon Taylor, and Mr. Lorenzo and I are here from MNN. and I'm quite exhausted after the.
Well, 'cause we
I
already
don't know.
did one show at 7.
And I don't know how these people have the energy they do, and that's why we have the other guests who are going to talk about health and fitness, and God bless them, because it's not my subject.
Let's talk about our guest, Shannon. We have Genie Tartell and Ted Kavana, who are the authors of Get Fit in Bed, which
right.
is about exercises that you can use in your own bed to get to bed earlier and to maybe help you live to a ripe and active age and beyond.
And unlike
set
my
the
movie
standard.
Relaxercise, these are serious exercises. These can really benefit you in terms of keeping in shape and your energy, your sleep. Tell
Your
us a little bit.
flexibility,
Oh,
your
flexibility.
strength, your
Yep.
endurance.
Can you tell us one specific exercise?
The exercises, one specific exercise, for example, would be while you're on your back to do leg raises. Another one would be to do alternating arm and leg stretches. The exercises are very, very simple exercises, and the intensity of your workout is very dependent upon how you want to do it. If you want to do the repetitions more rapidly, if you want to do more repetitions, it makes for a much more intensive
So you can
exercise
tailor
program.
it to your own
You can tailor it for
needs.
your own needs, which is why the book is so, and the exercises are so user-friendly. They're done in a sequence that's easy to follow. The exercises are easy to follow. The pictures are very helpful, and the instructions are very simple.
And would this work for somebody of any age group?
Any age group, any level of health. People who just don't want to go to the gym because they don't have the time, or people who are recovering from a surgery or any kind of disease entity. They
Here's
just
some
get up
pictures
and
here that
go to
folks
the
can
gym.
see. We'll hold it up.
Or athletes. If you're an athlete and you do these exercises, they can be part of your athletics. In other words, they can help build you up.
It doesn't have to be the only thing you do.
No, it won't
It
be the
can
only.
just be a
for
part
instance,
of your routine.
That's right. It's part of the routine. In fact, some of these exercises are karate-based exercises. I was out of shape when I started to exercise on the cot and learn these things. So in my 60s, I went into the martial arts, and I used these things to help me build up. So I included some karate exercises that are very simple. Because what happens with these exercises, they build up. In other words, they start off very simply, and the simple exercises condition you for what comes next in the very same routine. And some of them are yoga types, some of them are karate types, some of them are formal
So
exercise
you draw
types,
from different
Pilates.
disciplines.
We draw from different disciplines, but each one leads to the next one, and anyone can do them. And they are very effective as far as reducing anxiety.
Now tell us about if somebody wants more information, if they're on the internet, is there a website they
There's
can
a
go
website
to?
called getfitinbed.com.
Okay.
And they can even leave messages for Ted or myself, and we'll respond to them. Another thing about the book, though, that I'd like to add is for anyone who fears that the exercises might be too vigorous, there are areas in the book that actually give modifications. So if the
Oh, so they
patient
say-
has a back injury or a breathing problem or any kind of medical condition, the modifications are right there in the book. So again, it's we were very conscious about setting up a book that was safe for everyone.
I was here with Dr. Professor Corey, sorry, Professor, and I was saying to everybody, look, Professor Corey's 90, he's in terrific condition, he's sharp as a razor, and what does he do to stay fit? I worried that people wouldn't buy the book, they would find out what Professor Corey does to stay fit. What is it you do to stay so fit and mentally sharp?
Are you a health nut?
Well, if I tell everybody what I do, they'll be in the same position that I'm in. And being an ego, I would never allow my information to benefit others who give me nothing in a contribution to the information that I might offer. I mean, yeah, hell with that.
But you are the foremost authority.
Well, that's the truth. See, the truth will out.
That's right.
No, you see, the human body, the human being, the flies, the trees, the fish, the fowl, the beasts of burden are all parts of life. Human beings are a small speck in the mosaic of life. And this is the miracle on this planet Earth. Life is a miracle. Walking on the water was a trick.
What do you think about animal rights? What is your position on animal rights?
Well, I would forget about animal rights and think of the rights of the millions of people that are being killed in Iraq and Iran. What do we care about the animals? We don't give a goddamn about the human beings?
That's enough. There's a limit. There's a limit. From 7 to 7:30, I stood it. There's a limit. The animals came here first. The mosaic is the animals and the vegetarians and so on and so forth. And so on, and listen to more programs on animal rights in the future coming up here. And I got news for you. They lived a lot longer than 92.
I think, Professor Corey, that if the Taliban, if Al-Qaeda, if all those people would exercise in bed and do my routines, they would change. If they would exercise in bed, they would change their minds. It would cure a lot of problems.
More exercise than you do. They keep running away from the American soldiers. How much more exercise do you want them to have?
Professor Corey, Paul DiRienzo here. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about how you got into being the expert on everything. How did
I never
he's the
made a
world's
remark
foremost
like that.
authority.
The world's
I never
foremost
said I'm the
authority.
world's foremost on everything. Never.
Okay.
I may be the world's foremost authority, but that does not mean on everything.
Now, this
That's
is
the
Let Us
only
Talk.
thing that I'm not an authority on.
And we
I'm
do
not
take
an
phone
authority on
calls.
everything.
We have your right. The phone number is on the screen, and we want to take your calls at 212-757-1538. But I wanted to find out a little bit about how it is you became Professor Irwin Corey. Why did you decide to go in that direction of academics?
Well, I became Professor Irwin Corey by a guy called Richard Dyer Bennett, who was a folk singer who made Waltzing Matilda, a song very famous.
Oh, I love
you
that
know.
song.
And he was the one that recommended Burl Ives to be a singer at the Vanguard. And Burl Ives, on the United Un-American Activities Commission, said that Richard Dyer Bennett was a communist. A guy that gave him his job, he ratted on. Loose lips, Burl Ives. A pig, right? Like Kazan. He got an award in the year of the what?
Rat.
The year of the rat. And he is a rat.
Oops.
The man said in Navasky's book, Naming Names, he says, I felt miserable the way they booted me out of the party.
Oh.
And then in page 2, he says, I was so angry with what was going on that I quit the party. Did he quit or was he booted out? Kazan was a pig. As soon as he ratted, as soon as he told, he got a $500,000 contract with Warner Brothers.
So, Professor Corey, how did you become Professor Corey?
That's all. So Richard Dyer Bennett introduced me to the Vanguard.
At the
My
Village
first
Vanguard.
nightclub job. And I was going to give a lecture on Shakespeare Unexpurgated. And as I talk about it, I says, we all know Othello, which we know as Hamlet.
That's right.
I says, Shakespeare wrote many plays, and each of his plays consisted of 5 acts, and each act was considered an entity by itself and could have been given alone and away from each. But how did Julius keep all these entities together to make a complete ent? There was a guy called, what's his name? Kenneth Tynan. Did you ever hear of him?
Yes.
One of the great, calls me a chaplain's tramp with a college education. He raved about me. A guy, a reporter from the United States, saw the same show that Kenneth Tynan saw in London. And the American said he has never recalled another comedian from America that has been such a resounding failure. And on Mr. Kenneth Tynan's last line, he says, I beg you to be there. The reason the American reporter didn't like me is because part of my routine, which Kenneth Tynan quotes, says, "You all remember on the Lupercal, I thrice presented him a thringly thrown. Sophie Tucker is a fat pig." He says, notice the change of meter in the last line, the impish meter in the last line. And he says, "I beg you to be there." But this guy, this asshole who signs his name, didn't like me because I called Sophie Tucker a fat pig. I was on the bill with Sophie Tucker in 1952 at the Palladium in London. I got better reviews than she did. One of the reviews says, "He mingles the wise, the charming, and the farouche." Farouche is a French word, means wild and shy. So this Bernard Hughes, a Gentile, says to me, "Well, how would you use the word farouche in a sentence?" I says, "It's easy. Farouche, ato, Adonai." Every Jewish prayer starts with Baruch ato Adonai. Every Jew. Well, anyway, I was a big hit. And the guy wrote the article, he says, if he doesn't change his material, he won't last his engagement. I was held over for 7 weeks.
You've been held
You
over
probably
for...
outlasted him.
yeah.
So.
It was in it was called The Establishment, that Peter Cook. In fact, I got Henry Bruce the job in England. Because Kenneth Tynan wanted me to open the place, but I was too busy for that year. I recommended Bruce, and he thanked me, and Bruce opened. And then Bruce writes me a letter. He says he found a place here in London, be great for you. Take the job. I'm recommending you. He didn't know I recommended him. He didn't know that I also recommended him for the job at Cafe Agogo in 1963. I recommended him for that job. He didn't know it. And yet, when they busted him, I took his place.
Oh, you were his replacement.
There was a genius.
Yes, he was.
No, yes, he was a genius. You only become a genius at one part of your life. You know what part that is? When you die.
You die, right?
Then you become a genius. Because a genius is a person who has not fulfilled his potential. Isn't that true?
You were asking me, Professor Corey?
Well, I'm asking you a question. It's a rhetorical question. I don't expect any
I
answer.
talk about getting fit in bed, that's all I know.
Well, you know, more than that, Ted Kavana, one of the founders of CNN, and we were discussing CNN before that and your history in journalism and being the first cable broadcaster probably in the United States.
And we're thrilled to have you here.
We're thrilled to have you here. Welcome to Let Them Talk. And you have a pointedly different political outlook than Professor Corey.
Everybody has a pointedly different outlook than Professor Corey. For God's sakes,
Shannon Taylor.
Kazan only named names that everybody else had named 10 times already.
Well, you know, I am trying to avoid bringing politics into this because we're trying to sell books out there in Manhattan. So I think you know, but of course, Professor Corey denounced George Bush. All right, I'm one of George Bush's friends, and as far as, by the way, as far as the politics are of the Un-American Activities Committee, so forth and so on, just let me say for the record, that was run by Democrats, not by Republicans, and the Communist Party had a very strong discipline in Hollywood of what went on and what they wrote and everything else. Very strong discipline. And were there communists in Hollywood? Yes, throughout the party was very popular during
30 seconds over Tokyo.
during the 30s and the
30 seconds over Tokyo was that the propaganda?
I don't
Written by Dalton Trumbo. His name was taken off. 30 seconds over Tokyo was a communist propaganda.
No, but the party discipline was among those writers.
What's wrong
They
with
wrote.
it?
They
What's
approved
wrong
what
with it?
they approved what the party. They wrote what the party approved.
What is wrong with it? What is wrong with the communists getting a little control over a union? What's wrong with it?
because they were taking their orders, Professor Corey,
What
from
difference does it
from
make?
Russia. They were taking their
They were
orders
taking their
from
orders.
Russia.
That's right.
That
How
was
do
what's
you know
wrong
they
with
were
it.
taking their orders from Russia?
Because
What evidence have you got? In
Yeah.
the first place, it was unconstitutional to have the un-American activity in focus. You know why?
Let me- look-
Because the secret ballot was destroyed when you ask a member of a legally accepted party. The Communist Party was a legal party in the United States. And you cannot ask a person how they vote because you'll destroy the secret ballot. They have no right to investigate them. Go on and say, you know what I said? If the activity committee un-American ever called me, they would say to me, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? My answer to that would be, sir, do you mind repeating the question?
you asked me, I'm going to answer this question because you asked it, and the audience out there should know. What are the
Why
proof?
did you
What
investigate it, guys?
what is the evidence?
Were you ever, or are you now a member of the Democratic Party?
The answer to your question is that something called the Venona transcripts.
Oh, the Venona transcripts, I will not give you that particular privilege of using that as a premise, because that, I think, is a complete hoax. You accept it, but I don't accept it. Who are you more important than a little me?
You see, you wouldn't take my suggestion. I said talk about the bed and talk about the book.
But this is fascinating. I think
You don't
that-
know how fascinating this is going to
Well,
get.
because the book about being fit in bed, I mean, I wish I was as fit at my age as these gentlemen are right now, who are going at it 50 years now over this issue that most people don't even remember, yet it's so important in American history. And I'm glad we're giving an education to folks who are out there who don't know about UAC and Hollywood and
Hey, we're getting a bunch of phone calls.
let's try to
Should
take
we
let's try a couple phone calls.
change it up by taking a
let's
phone
change it
call?
up with some
See
calls.
if anybody's got an interesting
That's the
question.
number below. You can see 212-757, and you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, hello, gentlemen, and hello, Professor. I wish you could shed some light. This is Omar calling from the village of Harlem.
Omar.
You look beautiful, my brother. I wanted to ask you your opinion on the way they treated Paul Robeson, Canada Lee, and a lot of the African-American actors and actresses that were in Hollywood at the time. As you know, Paul Robeson was a scholar from Rutgers University. He was well-renowned, and they just about bankrupt him, and he had to just about go almost into exile. Also, if you can remember Josephine Baker, who fled and lived in Paris for many, many years. I wish you could shed some light. And even Charlie Chaplin, a lot of the other actors who were under that McCarthy period. I think it was around 1952, 1953 when they had that quote underlined Red Scare, and everyone was considered a communist if they couldn't recite the Star-Spangled Banner in Russia. Tongue-in-cheek, that is. I'll hang up and listen to your response.
Thank
you
you
look
very much,
beautiful, my
Omar.
brother.
All right, thanks for calling, Omar. Professor Corey, you want to answer Omar's question?
What is who?
Omar just called in with a question for you.
Omar who?
Omar from the Bronx.
Hello there, Mr. Bronx. What was your question?
First of all, Charlie Chaplin. Second of all, Paul Robeson. Third of all, Canada Lee. All victims of the McCarthy period scare, yes or no? The gentleman believes yes. I believe certainly Canada Lee was practically run out of town. Charlie Chaplin was kept out of town by that bastard Hoover, and I'm a Republican conservative, and I consider that bastard Hoover a bastard Hoover. And wait a minute. No, I'm not even allowing a dissenting point of view.
This is great, man.
I say that Mary Hoover is not a bastard. The only one that was a bastard happened to be Jesus. Nobody knew who his father was. They think it was the Holy Ghost, because God said that the Holy Ghost will come upon you and you will become pregnant. And Mary looks at her, but I don't know any men. She says, don't worry, have I got a ghost for you? It was the ghost that brought Mary into the world. You see, Christianity is based on Hebrew and paganism, because the pagans believed that the gods came down from Mount Olympus, give it to the human beings, and blamed it on the citizens.
Let's take another call. We have so many coming in. Go ahead. Oh, go, yes.
I just want to say in FBI Director Hoover's behalf that when the Japanese were interned, you remember that? Roosevelt interned them. The Supreme Court approved of that. The person who objected to it was J. Edgar Hoover.
And Eleanor.
Yeah, don't give Hoover any credit for anything. Hoover told me, he says there are 10,000 Communist Party members in the United States. He says 5,200 of them are FBI agents.
Oh, infiltrated.
Okay.
They were supporting the Communist Party with their 100 a week dues.
We're going to go to the
5,200
call.
people are
All right, we're
giving.
gonna take another
That's
phone
52.
call.
You're on.
Got another phone call coming
Yes,
in?
coming in.
Hi, Mr. Bronx.
Say hello, it's good to see you, and I always welcome your thoughts. Bye-bye.
Well, what's
All
your,
right,
Thank
for
you.
calling.
Thank you very much. We have
Just
another
one of your
call?
fans.
A fan who is saying thank you.
No fans.
And we have another call. You're on.
Hello, I just tuned into the show, but since I heard him talking about Christ and paganism and false religions, I would like to add to the show by saying that most religions that offer you eternal life through enlightenment are usually satanic religions, because the first lie ever recorded to man was by the Satan, saying that thou shalt not surely die.
All right. Thank you very much. We don't have much time, so we don't have a lot of time for those calls. Well, I'm not sure. That wasn't a question, really.
No, I think he wanted to make a
What
statement.
was
Just a
his question?
statement.
He
Yeah.
was making a statement.
Right.
The
Let's
first
try
lie
again.
was- oh, here we go.
Hello. You're on.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I'd like to say thank you to Professor Corey for giving me decades of education and humor. And I have to say that thank him because he told me the funniest joke I've ever heard, if I could just try and say it in the presence of the great one. What he said was telling us that Richard Nixon didn't have phlebitis, he had syphilis, because you can't fuck that many people and not catch something.
That was Jackie Mason who told you that joke.
No, it wasn't.
Get the source right.
We're going to go on. Thank you.
That happened to my joke.
All right.
I
Thank
said-
you for calling.
Yeah, I didn't say it as succinctly as you said it, but I said you can't screw 200 million people and not catch something. And that's what Nixon was, a Jew hater if there ever was one. There is no such thing as anti-Semitism. It's anti-Jewish because the Turks are Semites. The Egyptians are Semites. It's anti-Jewish, not anti-Semitic.
Okay.
I just
Go
want
ahead,
to
take
say
Kavana.
something again
Kavanaugh, reach
about
for the mic.
people when you're calling Richard Nixon anti-Semitic. I think my memory is a little bit weak on this, but the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was being overrun and the Egyptians were crossing the borders, the man who saved Israel was Richard Nixon. He sent a huge. He took a risk. He took a risk. A third world war with he took a risk of war with the Soviet Union because he sent a massive aerial supply of new tanks and weapons to Israel in their darkest hour. He saved Israel
Let's
in
go-
those days.
Then he should be condemned.
Oh, I happen to agree with Mr. Kavanaugh. He's 100% right on this. Kissinger condemned Israel, and Nixon was her only friend in those days, and God bless him for that action.
Let's-
He says to
We're going to take a call.
What am I doing in the middle of this firing range?
Hang on a second. We have another phone
We have
call.
another call.
Here we go.
Hi, you're on. We don't have
I
much
was
time.
wondering how the master feels about who Alan Dallas is.
About what?
dear?
I was wondering if he knows who Alan Dallas is, because I don't know, and I want to learn something
Alan
about him.
Dulles.
Thank you.
No, I want to say Alan Dulles.
We don't
is
have
another
enough time.
Jew
That's like
hater.
we have to have a. Yeah, right. He was like he was the former CIA director in the 1950s and was an architect of foreign policy at that time.
I want to say something. Did they give Poland East Prussia after World War II? After World War I, they gave them what was known as a Polish corridor because it was a landlocked country and it gave them access to the Baltic. So they gave them the thing called the Polish corridor. It split Germany from East Prussia to the mainland. After World War II, they gave Poland East Prussia, which is a piece of territory that's as large as the state of Pennsylvania. If they gave Poland East Prussia, they should have given the Jews Alsace-Lorraine and the Rhineland, because 600,000 German Jews were killed. 140,000 French Jews were killed. Their land and lives were taken from them. So the property that the Jews had of 600,000 should have been given to the remaining Jews of the world. If they gave Poland East Prussia, they could have given the Jews the Rhineland and Alsace-Lorraine.
Well, we only have
because they
30
took it from them.
seconds left.
Yeah, we're almost
So in the
done with
last
the
30
show.
seconds, I just want to, I'm sorry we can't take any more calls. I'd love to have more time, and we have to do this again sometime so we can just take more calls,
Yeah,
because
this
these are
was
great
really
calls.
fun.
So thank you all very
Thank
much.
everybody for being with us.
Yes, we have to
Don't
thank.
forget everybody's websites. We've got irwincorey.org. We've got Fit in Bed.
Here's the book, Get Fit in the Bed.
Get Fit in Bed.
If there are any conservatives out there, please buy the book. Save me a minute.
And
And we'll all see you next week.
we'll
Thanks,
see you next
Shannon.
week.